personal tragedy heaped upon the pharaoh. Nefertiti was gone. His mother, the great Queen T, died soon afterwards. So too did one of his minor wives, and even one of his daughters. After 12 years of tolerance, Akhenaten began to turn his power to destructive ends. Once he had been content simply to replace Egypt's traditional gods. Now he actively began to persecute them, and Amun-Re bore the brunt of his fury. The reformer had become a fanatic, incapable of tolerating other gods.
Akhenaten was certainly the first monotheist, but also certainly the first religious oppressor in the history of the world.
Wherever they could be found, the name and image of Amun-Re were destroyed. No reference to the god was too far away or too inaccessible.
He sent out what must have been armies of men with chisels, along with people who could read the walls and find the names of the gods to be removed.
Akhenaten even attacked the memory of his beloved father, Amenhotep, gouging out the part of his name that mentioned Amun.
The name Amunhotep means Amun is satisfied. Akhenaten removed the Amun portion of the name of Amun is satisfied because obviously under his reign Amun was certainly not satisfied. And so he in fact inflicted a punishment on his own father's name in order to comply with his own religious views, with his own religious fanaticism.
Consumed by his religious fervor, Akhenaten had lost touch with the outside world. Letters poured in to warn Pharaoh that his empire was under threat. Old allies, princes and vassals wrote begging him for help.
The king, my lord, should be informed that the king of Hatti has seized all countries that were the vassals of the king.
We've been writing to the king, our lord, for 20 years, but we haven't heard a single word back.
In Canaan, some locals beat my merchants and stole their money. Canaan is your country, and its kings are your slaves.
I keep writing to the palace, but you never reply.
Those princes and those people in the east were crying, "Help us!" But his ears did not hear anything.
Akhenaten ignored the desperate pleas of his subjects. The empire his father had worked so hard to maintain was now in danger. As their world began to fall apart, Akhenaten's oldest officials must have remembered how things had been under his father.
One could say that Akhenaten did all he could in his power to destroy his father's legacy. So at the end of his reign, what used to be a very cohesive power in the international arena is a country on the verge of crisis.
Only the pharaoh's personal charisma held the dream together. Then in 1336 BC, Akhenaten died. With Akhenaten dead, the keystone of Atenism was gone. In the hills above the deserted city, work was abandoned on the tombs of Akhenaten's courtiers.
The tombs at Tel El-Amarna are all unfinished and unoccupied. The paintings are barely finished in some cases. It's almost as though somebody has just heard the king has died, we're going away, drop your tools and go.
Now, with Akhenaten dead, traditional forces took hold of Egypt. Once loyal courtiers, artisans, even priests of the Aten flocked back to Thebes. eager to wrest order from the chaos that threatened to engulf Egypt. After just 20 years, Amarna, the setting for Pharaoh's great experiment, was abandoned. Emerging from the chaos came a new king, a 9-year-old boy. This child pharaoh had grown up in Akhenaten's palaces, his son by a minor wife. His name was Tutankhamun, meaning the living image of the Aten. Tutankhamun inherited a dynasty, a country, and an empire staring disaster in the face. But he was only a boy. Those who had lost out under Akhenaten seized their opportunity. They would use the young king to their own ends. First, they would have to change his name. Tutankhamun became Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun.
Tutankhamun is, to a certain extent, a dual personality. He is a personality in between the Amarna and the post-Amarna age. He certainly breathed Amarna air. He was imbued with this intellectual innovation. On the other hand, he was also the first pharaoh of the post-Amarna era. He was a puppet of the new leaders in Egypt, priesthood and military.
In a carefully scripted decree, Tutankhamun blamed his own father, Akhenaten, for neglecting Egypt's traditional gods and plunging Egypt into chaos.
When His Majesty's reign began, the temples of the gods and goddesses were in ruins. Their shrines had crumbled into piles of rubble choked with weeds. Their chapels were little more than footpaths. And the land was in chaos because the gods had abandoned it.
Tutankhamun's solution to these problems was simple.
There is a very important proclamation to the effect that order is being restored and then things are going to go back to the way they were before. So this is the bringing back of Amun, of the ancient gods, of the old order.
The old gods, the temples, and above all the power of the priests of Amun-Re were restored. The Aten was relegated to a minor place in the pantheon. No one went to its city. No one spoke of it. Akhenaten's heresy had simply never happened. By the time Tutankhamun was 19 and able to rule in his own right, everything seemed to have returned to normal. But that same year, Tutankhamun died, suddenly and mysteriously.
An examination of his skull has recently produced yet another theory concerning the Aten family, and that is that Tutankhamun may have been murdered. By whom? Question mark. It's a disaster for the family. It's a disaster for the royal family. There is no heir.
Tutankhamun would only have been a footnote in Egyptian history if it had not been for the perseverance of a 20th century archaeologist named Howard Carter. In 1922, Carter discovered a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that few else believed existed. In a single breathtaking moment, he would bring the age of Tutankhamun back to life.
The dusty floor itself maintained eerie footprints of the last people to breathe that very air 3,500 years earlier. As you note the signs of recent life around you, the blackened lamp, the finger marks on the freshly painted surface, the farewell garland dropped upon the threshold, you feel it might have been put there yesterday. Time is annihilated by such intimate details as these, and you feel an intruder.
Carter's find was unique. He had not just rediscovered Tutankhamun, he had unearthed the most fabulous treasure ever found. "32,000 objects and vast quantities of the gold of Egypt's empire were buried with the boy king."
There were thousands of objects, 6 chariots, 4 ceremonial beds, endless containers in the antechamber alone. When Howard Carter describes opening the tomb and eventually removing these objects, and it took 10 years to clear the tomb, he actually tells us that they had to rig up platforms above ground in order to avoid trampling on these objects and breaking them.
In spite of its astonishing contents, Tutankhamun's tiny tomb was not complete. His treasures had not been carefully placed, but randomly crammed in. This was no normal burial. On the back of the golden throne found in his tomb is a clue. Tutankhamun and his wife are shown sitting beneath the rays of the sun god, Aten. Tutankhamun's officials had taken the opportunity to seal away this reminder of his father's reign and the period they found so shameful. Tutankhamun was doomed to spend eternity with the very god he had renounced. Tutankhamun died without an heir. The backlash could now begin, and it was savage. Every mention of the Aten that could be found was destroyed with ruthless efficiency. Every reference to Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children was hacked out. The entire royal family was torn from the pages of history.
Everything is obliterated, and Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and this period become as though they had never happened. Akhenaten is a non-person. He's referred to, if ever he is mentioned, as that heretic.
Amarna, the once great and beautiful city that witnessed the birth of monotheism, gradually crumbled back into the sand, abandoned for all time.
I would say that Egyptian society as a whole saw the Amarna experience as one of its most tragic moments. So much so that the Amarna experience left its trace for hundreds of years. The memory of this very dark period of Egyptian history remained in Egyptian consciousness.
A turbulent episode in the history of Egypt was over. The dynasty of the great pharaohs who had founded the empire came to an end. The stage was now set for a new beginning, and a new family of pharaohs who would struggle to recapture the glory of Egypt's golden empire.